It was a quiet evening in Gracechurch Street. The fire burned low in the grate, casting a soft orange light across the dining room as Mrs. Gardiner sat at her writing desk, composing a letter. Mr. Gardiner was halfway through A Handbook for Travellers in Great Britain, his preference for such books being second only to his fondness for the real thing. "Edward," his wife began, a touch of deliberation in her tone, "I've been thinking about our summer excursion." Mr. Gardiner looked up, his expression tinged with amused suspicion. "Have you now? I hope it does not end with us journeying to the ends of the earth." "No further than Derbyshire," she replied, with a knowing smile. He raised an eyebrow. "Derbyshire? But I thought we were bound for the lakes." "We were," she said lightly, "but I considered today that such a journey may prove too long a time away from your business, and that a shortened tour might suit you better." He gently pressed the pages and covers together before folding his hands over the book. "A very rational explanation, my dear, which of course renders an instant suspect." Mrs. Gardiner laughed softly. "I am simply thinking of Elizabeth. She has had, shall we say, much to reflect upon of late. Her spirits seem uneven, and I cannot help but wonder whether a change of scene, one that allows her to see certain people in a different light, might be of service to her." "Certain people," he replied, "and by certain, could you mean Mr. Darcy, perhaps?" At this, Mrs. Gardiner did not answer immediately. Instead, she rose from her desk to pour another cup of tea, and only as she handed it to him did she murmur, "You know, he was not the man we thought him to be, and I am not altogether certain that Elizabeth still thinks so either." He sipped thoughtfully. "And it just so happens that his estate is close to Lambton, where you grew up." "I cannot be blamed for knowing the geography," she replied, with feigned innocence. They shared a comfortable silence as Mr. Gardiner considered his response. He continued, "You are wondering perhaps if Darcy might be there, and if that were the case, perhaps a chance meeting might happen." Mrs. Gardiner caught his meaning at once. If she was to see him again, why not let it be by chance? Let her see him at ease among his own, not constrained by the formality of Hertfordshire. I am almost certain that she would find him more agreeable. Besides, it has always been known that his father, the late Mr. Darcy, was a kind master. Why then should the younger Mr. Darcy be any different? Finally, Mr. Gardiner gave a short nod. "Then to Derbyshire we shall go. With your careful guidance, perhaps we shall stumble across a certain fine house, purely by accident, of course. I find myself in accord with your plan. It may be that this quiet undertaking could bear fruit more delightfully than we dare yet hope." They exchanged a look of mutual understanding, as the quiet of the evening seemed to seal their unspoken intention. A subtle scheme had now been set in motion, fashioned with care and affection, to guide Elizabeth gently towards a future that might otherwise remain unseen. And so it was a year later, when the Gardiners were once again guests at Pemberley, that Mrs. Gardiner found herself seated with Elizabeth in the morning-room, a gentle April light casting long shadows across the polished floor. Outside, the lawns were freshly green, the air smelled of rain and lilac, and somewhere beyond the glass, Mr. Darcy and Mr. Gardiner were deep in conversation near the stables. Elizabeth sat by the window, a bit of mending in her lap, though the needle had long been still. Her gaze drifted over the landscape she had come to know so intimately, and after a moment she spoke, as if finishing a thought she had held for some time. "A year ago I would never have believed it, that I should live here and be happy." She turned slightly to look at her aunt, a smile playing at the corner of her mouth. "But I am, entirely." Mrs. Gardiner, who had been busy arranging flowers, gave a small smile of her own. "I dare say you are, and you were never a woman to settle for mere contentment." Elizabeth laughed softly. "No, indeed. I rather thought I was destined for spinsterhood, at least until I could find a man with both intelligence and kindness who would not bore me senseless or try to insult my entire family. "It's a rare combination," said Mrs. Gardiner. "But then I recall a time when you were quite determined to dislike Mr. Darcy." "And I did, with vigour." She paused, threading her needle with idle fingers. "But it was a borrowed opinion, mostly, from poor Wickham, and my own pride, of course, of that I had no small supply. You know," Mrs. Gardiner said, "when you made that little detour to Lambton last summer, I wondered if you would see him differently." "I know," Elizabeth said. "You were terribly subtle about it, mentioning Lambton's proximity to Pemberley no fewer than 6 times at breakfast." "5," her aunt corrected, smiling. "I counted." Elizabeth laughed, then grew quiet again. "But you were right. I did see him differently, and he was so changed, or perhaps not changed, but revealed, as if I'd only ever known the portrait and not the man." Mrs. Gardiner regarded her with quiet fondness. "And now?" Elizabeth looked out the window, where Darcy had just bent his head to listen to something Mr. Gardiner was saying, his posture easy, even playful. "Now," she said, "I know the man, and I love him. I think, in the end, it was not so much about forgiveness or understanding, it was about time. Time to listen, time to grow, time to meet again as ourselves." "And what a fortunate meeting it was," said Mrs. Gardiner, "even if entirely by accident." Elizabeth grinned. "Entirely." From the hallway came the sound of footsteps and a voice, warm and familiar. "Elizabeth!" She sat aside her mending and rose, smoothing her gown. "Excuse me, aunt. It appears my husband is in search of me." "As well he should be," Mrs. Gardiner replied with a smile. "He has the good fortune to be loved by a most uncommon woman." Elizabeth paused at the door, glancing back. "And I have had the good fortune to be guided by one." Mrs. Gardiner looked up, holding a single rose by its stem between her fingers. Her smile was mild, but her eyes were far too composed not to be hiding something. "Guidance is often mistaken for good luck," she replied evenly. "But then, we have had our share of both, haven't we?" Elizabeth stepped closer to the doorway, watching her aunt with a small, assessing smile. "Yes," she said, "some might say our path was most conveniently arranged." Mrs. Gardiner made no reply, only turning a rose slightly in its vase and adjusting a spray of greenery, a picture of domestic serenity. But Elizabeth noticed the faintest twitch at the corner of her mouth. She lingered a moment longer, as if expecting, or perhaps daring, her aunt to say more. None came. And so Elizabeth gave a single nod, half to herself, and turned to go. As the door clicked softly shut, Mrs. Gardiner allowed herself one small smile, the kind meant only for empty rooms, or for secrets too long in the keeping to be spoken aloud now.